Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today we're going to talk about Dark Side of the Ring of Harley Race, which was very good. In fact, might have been one of the better Dark Side of the Rings ever produced. It was really good. And I think it was one of the, I think it might be the best biography episode of Dark Side of the Ring that they've ever done. They told basically some wrestling history mixed in with some crazy mythology of how tough Harley Race was. Most of these stories could very well be true. You know, he was legitimately a tough guy. So it's entirely believable that Harley Race did all of the things that everybody says that he did. So I want to actually start my discussion about, I guess, what you want to call bolstering the Dark Side of the Ring episode with specifically the Vince McMahon Harley Race stuff. In the episode, they told a lot of stories. I want to just tell the story of how big Harley Race was in the middle of the map. So, for 4 years, between 1964 and 1968, Harley Race was in a tag team with Larry the Axe Hennig. He wasn't known as Larry the Axe Hennig at the time, who was the father of Mr. Perfect. He is known as Pretty Boy Larry Hennig, and Harley Race is known as Handsome Harley Race. So for 4 years in the AWA, they were a tag team. Larry Hennig breaks his leg. They try to get back together in '68. It ain't quite working out. Harley Race leaves to go solo. He spends, pretty much most of the 70s as a wrestler in the Kansas City and St. Louis area, where he's a champion routinely in these territories before becoming, of course, the world heavyweight champion. Now, he became so popular in these two territories that he was able to buy into these two promotions. The St. Louis promotion is called the St. Louis Wrestling Club. The Kansas City promotion, which was known as Central States, the actual name of it was Heart of America Sports Attractions. So he ends up buying into both of these promotions. And in the early 80s, he's booking himself. So Larry Matisic is telling the story in his book, Wrestling at the Chase, which tells the story of St. Louis Wrestling promotion, that around this time, now that Harley is a partner in his promotion, not just because he's been a world champion at this point, I think 2 or 3 times, but he's also got creative control because he's a partner in these promotions. He's booking himself pretty much to be unbeatable, much like guys like Dick the Bruiser had done, much like guys like the Sheik, Ed Farhat had done, much like a lot of people, Jerry the King Lawler, so many, that when you're the owner of the promotion and you're the top star, you don't want to do any jobs. So Harley Race is now pretty much refusing to do jobs. So he's booking himself to avoid doing jobs. So there's a tons of disqualifications and different things like that, which is a very stark change from Sam Muchnick, who is the original guy from St. Louis. His formula, which was much like the Japanese formula in our modern mindset, is that matches ended in the ring, clean pinfalls, wins, loses, that kind of thing. And Harley Race had benefited from that. But now it's the early 80s. Now he's got authority. He don't want to do any jobs. And part of that is because he's also making huge money in Japan. And he doesn't want to do any jobs because he doesn't want the Japanese newspapers and the Japanese magazines to see him losing in the United States. This is also something that will become a big deal with like Bruiser Brody. It will also become a big deal with Steve Williams. It will become a big deal with a lot of people who went over to Japan and made a lot of money. They didn't want to do any jobs once they got in the United States. So Harley Race had a lot of reasons why he wasn't going to do any jobs. For starters, he was a top guy, solidified in these areas. Hard to get people to believe that he was going to lose anyway. Second, he was the owner of the promotion. Third, he had the Japanese contingent, and he didn't want to look bad and look weak in front of those people. Of course, he had to kayfabe him, brother. So as things are not going well in St. Louis, it's starting to actually lose money. Harley Race is now starting to do business, of course, outside of St. Louis. He's the NWA World Champion at this point. He's going to wrestle Ric Flair at Starrcade in Greensboro in 1983, Thanksgiving 1983. Vince McMahon hears about this. According to Dark Side of the Ring, he offers Harley Race $250,000 to no-show that event, which would have killed it, by the way. it would have been a dead on arrival if he had not shown up. But then they tell a story that they got into it. They don't say what they got into it about. And Vince just, I don't know, transformed and tried to attack Harley Race, which sounds psychotic, but Vince McMahon is psychotic. And, I believe it. For some reason, I believe it. It's one of those tall tales that is like, that sounds nonsensical. That, Vince McMahon in 1983 would try to fight Harley Race, a guy who is, he's not in his physical prime, but he's still Harley Race. There's just no, Vince ain't have a chance in hell, but it's believable. Anyway, Vince McMahon gets into it with Harley Race. Harley supposedly put him in a front face lock or something to that effect. And he ends up getting out of that situation. He goes on. They didn't mention the success of Starrcade, by the way. So from the Tim Hornbaker book, I believe, it tells that Starrcade drew 15,000 people and was the first $1 million gate in pro wrestling. This is several months before WrestleMania 1. So this becomes the Passion of the Torch moment. Harley Race now is going to go back and be a promoter in St. Louis and Kansas City. He's going to wrestle, of course. But now Ric Flair is the guy for the NWA going forward. And we fast forward until about 1986. Now Vince is ready to do his national expansion. He's going to expand. One of the first places he goes is St. Louis. So he sends, I believe, Andre the Giant first. Then, Hulk Hogan comes in shortly thereafter. And Harley Race, who owns a piece of St. Louis, gets pretty pissed off about this. Now, story goes that he pulled a gun on Hulk Hogan. That's according to Hulk Hogan. So it might not be true. Story that they told in Dark Side of the Ring is that he was looking for Hulk Hogan. He was looking for Vince. He couldn't find either one of them. So he set the ring on fire. And Mick Foley hilariously says, it could have happened. It's kind of believable, okay? Fair enough, maybe he set the ring on fire, maybe he didn't, who knows? The mythology of Harley Race is entertaining, so we'll just say that he did. All right, so he's pretty pissy about this. Now, in I think it was, I forget which Hornbaker book it was in, we find out that Vince ended up, his invasion of the St. Louis, Kansas City area ended up costing Harley Race $500,000, which is, of course, twice the money that Vince offered him, just a few years prior to jump ship and come to the WWF. So Vince cost this guy $500,000. Harley Race ends up selling his shares of Central States at a loss. He ends up, of course, Vince completely destroys the St. Louis Wrestling Club. And Harley Race is basically left hanging out to dry in the late 80s. The Central States Wrestling promotion ended up being purchased by Jim Crockett. Jim Crockett, of course, Jim Crockett Promotions, who ends up selling to Ted Turner to create WCW. So they tell you a lot about Vince McMahon destroying the territories and all that kind of stuff. What they don't tell you is a lot of that was also Jim Crockett buying various promotions, one of which was Central States. So now that Vince has cost him $500,000 or whatever, Harley Race goes to work for Vince McMahon in the WWF, and they make him the King Harley Race, and they actually go back to Handsome Harley Race, which a lot of people, again, if you watch the documentary, if you listen to people at the time, they'll say, hey, we hated this. This is stupid. Larry Madisick, in his book on Wrestling at the Chase, he talks about how everybody hates this gimmick because the St. Louis fans who have known him knew him as being a rough and tumble, methodical, tough, almost like an old, Navy guy or something like that. Just a real brute. And now he's coming in, he's got the bleach blonde hair, and he's paunchy. And, he's not physically the performer that he used to be just a few years prior. And everybody thought it was too gimmicky. It was too much of a cartoon. And that this thing would never work. And that it was never going to get over. And it didn't get over, if we're being honest. Some of the worst stuff I've ever seen from Harley Race comes from this era. But Handsome Harley Race is actually a backtrack to about 20 years prior, when he was known as Handsome Harley Race in Minneapolis. So, that being said, they didn't mention in Dark Side of the Ring that the WWF was actually sued over this gimmick by Jerry the King Lawler. Again, the national expansion, Vince is going everywhere. And when he takes the King Harley Race into Memphis, Jerry the King Lawler says, well, I'm the king of Memphis. You're infringing upon my gimmick, brother. And he sued them and won. And so Vince drops the King Harley Race gimmick when they go to Memphis. And that seems like an interesting story that they probably should have told in Dark Side of the Ring. But they did end up telling the story of Harley Race getting injured in a match with Hulk Hogan that pretty much ended his in-ring career. It should also be noted, and this was something that was also in the Wrestling at the Chase book, is that, of course, Harley Race was a guy who used to use a diving headbutt as a finisher. And he complained almost constantly of his neck injuries. And he says that he always tell Chris Benoit to stop doing the diving headbutt. And that he hates that he popularized it because so many guys ended up having neck issues afterwards. Now, we know that Chris Benoit got his diving headbutt from the Dynamite Kid, who probably saw Harley Race do it. Now, a lot of the fun personal stuff, well, not so much fun, but the interesting personal stuff that was gleaned from Dark Side of the Ring was some of my favorite stuff because I didn't know a lot about Harley Race's personal life. Him having a wife at 17 who was pregnant and died in a car accident is absolutely sad. That's incredibly sad. And it actually seemingly led to a battle with alcohol that Harley would have later in life. And you could see that from that point forward, a lot of issues involved alcohol with Harley Race. And his wife, his second wife, Ivana, or Yvonne, I think that's how her name is pronounced, basically talked about all the struggles that she had being married to him. And it was the typical, my husband's never home, he chose wrestling over his family, that kind of stuff. But she also mentions quite a bit that there was maybe some abuse in their household, perhaps. She also mentioned that, he would verbally berate her quite often, that, he would get arrested, but then the police they had such reverence for him because he was such a big star. Usually, it probably lived in the St. Louis, when he started his wrestling promotion in 1999, it was in Missouri. So he probably lived in that area. Much like Jerry the King Lawler never really left Memphis. I would imagine he didn't really leave Missouri too much. So it was a situation where he was a local celebrity and maybe the police was giving him some grace and he was able to get away with a lot of things. And as usual, when people allow you to get away with things, the behavior just basically escalates. So we are told about this boating accident where Harley was driving drunk, boating, and smashed into another boater. And, he was berating his wife and was drinking. And, his wife ended up calling his psychiatrist. And, he ended up getting divorced. And he lost $250,000 in this judgment and was financially destroyed. Now, if you add this to the losses that he incurred a few years prior when Vince invaded St. Louis, this guy lost a lot of money. He should have been far more financially well off than he actually was. But it seems that he needed money, and this led to him, of course, doing more appearances, and he ended up, unfortunately, doing the Wrestling Secrets expose thing, which I never thought was Harley Race. I thought it was somebody else. I'm not even gonna lie. But then again, I wasn't when I was a kid, I didn't know Harley Race, in the dark. You would definitely have to show me that Gerber baby head of his in order for me to be like, oh, that's Harley Race. If it was in the dark, if he's wearing a mask or something like that, I would definitely wouldn't have been able to tell. So it was an excellent biography. Of course, there was a lot of tall tales told, but Harley Race is a guy who is, no matter what book you pick up, no matter what the writer, there's a lot of people who knew him and knew that he was legitimately tough, knew that he was legitimate in terms of business, a businessman, an honorable guy. So I thought this was fantastic. But let me know what you guys think. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort